Yes, David, I think that's really funny as well. Waiting for season 3 to come out of that one. Also a good show. Okay, so today is lesson 3, kind of a drizzly Thursday. The sun's maybe kind of thinking about making an appearance. Not sure, we'll see. So let's jump into Blackboard and see what we're doing today. So we're going to go over assignment 2 today, which is going to be due, oops, would help if I was in my right section. It's Thursday, which means we're purple. So we're going to go over assignment 2, which is due in 3 weeks. Then we're going to spend some time focusing, looking at a little more detail, some of the view syntax that comes with .NET MVC. That syntax goes by the name of Razor. So we're going to experiment with some of the options, some new options that we have for creating views. And then we're also going to take a bit of a deeper dive into some of the syntax that we see in Razor views. Then the last thing we want to do is make sure we've got our database software set up, and we can create, we're going to create 2 databases. We're going to create a local database used for our in-class project, and then we'll also show you how to create a database on the Azure Cloud portal, which is what you're going to need to do for your assignment. So we will go over all of that stuff today. So I think also if you submitted in the discussion board posting for lesson 2, if you made a submission here, then I will have noted your submission and given you a grade for that activity that would already have been done. So that was due yesterday at 5 o'clock. So let's have a look at assignment 2, which is available for you here in the assignments tab. That's all right. I think you can, I can allow you 7 minutes grace. That's no problem. If you did those things a little bit after, that's fine. Okay, so for assignment 2, you're going to create a new project in Visual Studio, and the main goal of this is for it to work with your SQL Server database to perform CRUD operations. We talked about CRUD in our last semester. What does CRUD stand for? You're building a CRUD project. Yep, thanks, Jordan. So it stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. So your application is going to talk to your SQL Server database so it can create, read, update, and delete data. It's worth 15% of your grade. Due Wednesday, the Wednesday after Thanksgiving at 5 o'clock. You need to submit 2 things on Blackboard. Just submit to me your GitHub link, and you can use the same repository link that you submitted in your assignment 1 document. You'll also include a link to the live website, which you will deploy on the Microsoft Azure hosting platform. And we will look at doing that next week. You have to do your own work. You can't do the work with someone else or have someone do the work for you or share your code or copy your work from the internet. Okay. If I have concerns around this, then I'll schedule a WebEx one-on-one meeting with you so that we can go over your project and I can verify that, yes, you do understand what you've submitted. By all means, you are allowed to look at our online, my GitHub repository from class, but you can't just download the code, make changes to it, and give it back to me. Okay, you have to do your own project. Some guidelines or rules around using code that you find online. Can you do it? Yes, but with these kind of what I think are reasonable guidelines. Number 1 is that you have to include a link to where the code came from. So you're not passing off something as your own that you didn't create. Number 2, it shouldn't be more than 10% of your project. So you're not you can't copy someone's entire sample tutorial, for example. You have to be able to explain any code that you used. And lastly, and probably most importantly, before you use code that you find online, please send me the link and check with me. Say, hey, here, Rich, here's some functionality, a code library I wanted to use or a code snippet. It's on this website. This is what I want to use it for. And just make sure that I send you a reply and say that it's okay. So basically for your project, you're going to create a new .NET Core MVC web application project, and you'll pick the same options that we've picked in class over the last couple of weeks in creating our projects. You're going to choose individual accounts for authentication, and you should also be enabling HTTPS. You're going to set up and connect to an SQL Server database. If we have time, we'll create the database. You can actually create the database today, and we'll deal with the connection part next week in class. You're going to build model classes, kind of like we did in class last week, where we built our category model. We'll do more practice with this next week in class. And then we're going to use a tool called Migrations in next week's class, which will build the database tables for you. So you don't have to build your models and your tables. You only have to build your models, and Visual Studio can translate those into database tables for you with a couple lines of code. It's quite efficient, accurate, and easy. And then we're going to use Visual Studio to basically build the controllers and views for us. So you actually have to write very little code for the assignment. Basically, you're just writing the model classes. You're going to set up the project, set up the database connection. You will write the code to generate your models, but then Visual Studio will build the database tables, and it will can also build your controllers and views. So for your models, you will need at least 2. And just to put this in perspective, I'll just speak in context of one student's project, and then I'll actually show you a project from last year so you can get an idea of what this might look like. So I'll just go to our project submission site. Okay, so for example, one of the projects, so we've got a car battery site. So in this project, not sure whose this is, we may have a car model as well as a battery model. And there needs to be a relationship, some kind of relationship between the 2 models of one to many. So for example, one battery might be used in many cars. So each car would then have a battery foreign key to relate it. Look at another project here. So we've got skincare. So we might have a skincare model, and we might have a skincare. So we might have a problems model and a solutions model. In this site, we might have cats and questions. So every question might be related to a particular cat adoption. So you'll design the models based on the project that you planned out for assignment 1. There has to be some kind of connection between the models. You'll then use Mvc Scaffolding. So scaffolding is a code generation tool in Visual Studio that is going to build your controllers and views to perform all your create, read, update, and delete. You'll then have to customize some of the layout template. So you're going to add some links to the controllers that you make. You're going to add a descriptive title in your site navigation and your page titles. You're going to put in the footer your name, your student number, and the course code. And then you're going to change the home page, take out the default text that Visual Studio creates, and put in a proper explanation of your website. You'll commit to GitHub regularly. So for full marks, you'll need to make at least 4 commits, and they have to be over at least 2 days. So if you make all your commits on 1 day, you will only get part marks for the GitHub. You'll need a README file and a gitignore file as well. You're going to publish your site. to the cloud on Microsoft Azure. Again, we'll do this in class next week. So many of the components you need for the assignment are things we're going to do in class next week. So be sure you do not miss class next week. There are a couple of opportunities for bonus marks as well. Number one, you can customize the theme. So you can design your own CSS, or you could go and use an open source theme that you add in as long as you reference where it came from. I know there's many talented designers in the class, and I know a lot of people will want to do their own design. So I'll give you a bonus mark for doing that. Bonus number two, add any advanced MVC feature that we haven't covered in class, and make sure you list it in your README file. So I'm going to show you a really good project submission from last year. And then I'll also show you the Git repository so you get an idea. So Rebecca is a student in the web program. She's graduated now. She's working as a project manager for a local web company. So you can see the customizations right here from the homepage. She designed a little logo up here. She followed the requirements to add her name, student number to the bottom. She's given me a link to her Git repository, and she's changed the homepage. She's also changed the color scheme and font a bit, and changed the homepage to describe. So she built a recipe site. So there are two models in the project. There's a category model, where we could add, edit, and delete categories. And again, she's added a link here in the nav bar, much like we've done in class. And then she has a related model and controller for recipes. So again, we can add, edit, or delete. And when we go to add a recipe, we can then just pick the category. She also added a file upload functionality. So in the site, I can manage both the categories as well as the recipes. And she got a bonus mark for kind of doing some nice customizations on the design. In the GitHub repository, what does it kind of look like? So she's got a README file explaining the project, how the site works, what features there are. She's linked to the live website. This link is no longer online, but it was at the time. So we'll look at creating a README file like this. And then in her commit history for assignment 2, so I can see all of the commits she made with descriptive messages. I can see what changes she was making as she worked on it. Okay, so on this date, I modified the CSS, then I worked on my file uploads, I updated my nav bar, I created my README file. So your commit messages should describe what work you're doing. So at the end of assignment 2, you should have a working website. You're basically creating the implementation of your plan for assignment 1. So here's the rubric. And you will get a mark in each section. Any section where you don't get full marks, I will give you feedback as to what may have been missing or how you could have, what else you could have done in order to get full marks. Oops, this should say Blackboard. So I'll just document quickly. Does anybody have any questions at all about anything in the assignment? If there's anything you're not clear about what the expectations are, then happy to discuss it. Okay. David is good. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions at all? Okay, thanks, Tushar. For assignment 3 and 4, you're then going to work with your same project and we're going to add additional functionality to it. So assignment 3 will be largely around adding authentication rules into the assignment. If you do have any questions that come to you through the class today, then by all means, please let me know. Okay. So let's jump back into our pet store project. Well, I just plug in here. So you can fire up Visual Studio. You can open up Positive Pause project that we created last week. Positive Pets. And we want to get our site running again in the browser. So what's the recommended way to do that? Once our project is open, how do we start our local server and get our site loading in the browser? Thanks, Jordan. So we can click on debug. David, yep, got to start without debugging. And we get our homepage loaded up here. So much like in your assignment last week, we changed the homepage to talk about what the site is. So last week we made some views. We made a browse view and an index view under categories. And we also made a new view on our first lesson. We made an about view. So we're going to create a view today, but we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. So I'm going to open up, if you don't already have it open, let's open up our categories controller. So when your project opens, whatever tabs you had open last, they're still open. So these are all the files we were working with last week. If you don't have your categories controller, you can always find it over here inside of controllers and categories controller. So we built this file last week, and when we created it, Visual Studio automatically created the index method, which we've modified. We've customized it to add some code. We did this last week. And then we also created the browse method that would display a selected category. So we kind of built out this workflow, categories, and we click on one, and then we go to browse, and we get the selected category showing up in a heading tag. So this is largely what we did last week. We're going to make a new method in view today, but we're going to make the view in a different way. So we'll make a new method. Again, it will return just like our other methods. It's going to return this iActionResult class. We're going to call our view create. Sorry, we're going to call our method create. And just like the other methods we wrote last week, it will just return the view. So go ahead and add this create method that returns a view to your categories controller. We'll try it out in a minute. So our URL would be /create. So what will happen if we now try this URL in the browser? We go to localhost /categories/create. What result should we get? Okay, exactly. Jordan and David, we're going to get an error because we can call the URL, but it's going to try to return a view, and we don't have a view called create, at least not yet. So if I try this URL, right, we've seen this error several weeks in a row now. So we know when we get this, The view called create was not found. So we know we're going to need to build this file. And we're going to do that next, but we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. Now, we talked back in the first week that one of the nice things about .NET MVC is that the URLs tend to be descriptive. Let's open up our slide deck from week 1 for a second. We talked about we looked at this slide in week 1, and we talked about how the URL pattern actually describes exactly what should happen, right? So we said on this page, we would expect to see the details of order number 1000. Okay, Kathleen, happy to help, but whenever you want to say there's an error, always please provide info about what the error says. Because it's hard to debug without knowing what the error is. So what's it telling you? Okay, a couple things to try. Saying unable to connect. First thing is let's build the site and make sure it compiles. So click on your build menu and click build solution. Let's make sure that the build succeeds. Try that first. Let me know if it works. Okay. All right. So there's no compiler, so that's good. So I have seen it before. Did it work for you last week, Kathleen? Were you able to run your projects no problem? Okay. Okay. There's some solutions here, Kathleen. I'm going to show you what you can try. So one thing you can try is in your Solution Explorer, right-click your solution and choose Open Folder in File Explorer. That'll take you here. Okay. You can try, you may need to close Visual Studio. There's this .vs folder, this hidden folder. You can try deleting that folder and restarting Visual Studio. Yeah, so close Visual Studio first. Try deleting this .vs folder, then open your project up again and give that a try. It's hidden. So on the View menu, you'll need to check off Hidden Items. You can notice it's sort of, the icon's sort of like faded on mine. So you have to enable, you have to view the hidden items in order to see it. Yeah, so give that a try, see what happens. And if not, if we need to look at it, I can help you a bit more after, okay? So coming back to our new method, what do you think, if this is a descriptive URL, what do you expect to see? What should we show at /categories/create? What would be on that page that we need to build? Yeah, exactly, Colton. A form so that a user could create a new category. So Visual Studio actually can build the form for us. Of course it can. So we'll right click our method. We'll right click the word create. We're going to pick add view. Now we've been using so far for the views we've created, we've been using this razor view empty that just creates a blank page. We're not going to use that this time. We're just going to create a razor view. And it says a razor view with or without a strongly typed model. So that's what we want. So pick this option that says razor view and click add. And now we get this little pop-up window that we didn't have before. Fatima, you can find my GitHub link on Blackboard under Weekly Learning Tools and Resources. That will take you to my main GitHub page, and then you can find the repository there. No problem. So our view name is going to be create. We now have this drop down that says template. Just right click the method name, choose add view, and just pick razor view, the second one that doesn't say empty. Then click add, and that'll bring you to this pop-up box that says add razor view. And the view name will say create because it just copies the method name. Now we have this template dropdown and it defaults to empty. Well, I said we don't want empty, and as Colton mentioned, we need a form. So if I click that dropdown, we'll actually see there are 6 different view templates. There's create, delete, details, edit, empty, or list. So Colton, I'll ask you, which template do we want? Absolutely, we want the create template. And now once we pick one of these templates, it says that a model class is required. So I'm going to click the drop down for model class. Which model do we want to use for our form template? What kind of object are we going to create? You got it, Jordan. We want to use it to create a category. I'm going to leave these boxes checked. We've got reference script libraries and use a layout page. And we can either browse to a layout, or it says if we leave it empty, it will use the layout defined in the view start file, which we can look at after. So that's fine. So just make sure these 2 boxes are checked. So view name is create, template is also create. The model is category, and we are going to use our JavaScript libraries and our default layout template. So now we can just click the add button. And Visual Studio says it is scaffolding. Scaffolding means it's building code for us. And now we have a view with a whole bunch of auto-generated code. I'm going to go back to my browser. I click refresh. Now notice we still got the same error. Why do we still have the same error? We now have use categories create, but when I try and load it, this still isn't working. Any idea why? We would think it should be working. There's going to be one more thing we actually need to do this time. How do we make sure all the code in our project is up to date? I just asked Kathleen to do it, actually. You got it, Jordan. We need to build. So now that we've created that new view, we're going to build the solution, and notice there was an update. So it's made a new version of our DLL. Now I go back here and our site is reloaded, and now we've got a category form. So our form automatically contains an input for category ID and an input for name. How do you suppose this happened? How did Visual Studio know what this form was supposed to look like? We can actually go and check out the code on the page. A lot of it is standard HTML, but there's a bunch of stuff we haven't really seen before. So it built this form. How did it decide what the form should look like? What do you suppose is happening here on line 1? We haven't seen this before. Well, I guess we did see it before, sorry, last week in our categories index. So what does this code mean on line 1? What do you suppose this model of type category means? We used this model declaration last week here on line 1. So what does this model tell us? It's a slightly different version here. So here's our new form. Okay, Kathleen, you and I will maybe have to spend a little time one-on-one looking at that. So what is this model declaration doing? What's the purpose of it? This is kind of the key to all of the form generation code. Exactly. Thanks, Jordan. So it means this form is connecting, it's using, or it's based on the category model. And we created this category model last week with 2 properties, right? Category ID and a name. So it auto-generated an input for each one. We've got an input, and then we've got one of these server-side directives, ASP4. So this ties the first text box to the category ID property in the model. And then we have our second text box, again, that's linked with ASP4 to the name property. Now our form is mostly functional. It even recognizes that this is a number, right? It gives us these little arrows. If I try and type, notice what else it does. It even does some validation here. And I type text in here, and it says, no, that's no good. This has to be a number. It also tells me it's required. As soon as I type in a digit, that error message goes away. That's what this span is for. This span ASP validation. It's checking automatically that the inputs match the rules for category ID. It said automatically it'll be a primary key and it's numeric. So any values that we enter that don't follow this, it uses jQuery. Our project uses jQuery validation. And it's using this bootstrap class of TextChanger, which is red, to print error messages in red. So this saves us lots of time. We don't have to write a lot of validation in JavaScript the way that form developers did for many, many years. For creating the file, I chose a Razor view, called it create. template is create. The model is category. Yeah, I've put all the options in the chat that you need. So this page, it's functional, probably could use a little bit of cleanup. What changes should we make? So this gives us a working form, but it's not like totally 100%, I'd say, production ready. So what changes should we make to this form to kind of improve it? Either visually or function-wise. How would you make this page better? Okay. Yes, David, you're right. In our actual working project, it will be generated by the database. Yes. So, and it's smart enough to know that once we actually tie this to a database, if we scaffolded the page, it wouldn't be here. So yes, you're right. We'll leave it for now, but that's true. Anything else you would change here? But that is a good point. We probably shouldn't have the category ID at all. That should be a hidden field. Is there anything else you'd modify on this page? Or would you say to the owner of Positive Pause, okay, this page is done. It's perfect. Okay, yeah, the title's weird. Agreed. So let's look at what the scaffolding does. It actually gives us two different H1 tags. It takes the method name and puts it in an H1, and then it takes the model name and puts it in an H4. So that kind of looks silly. So let's just create a new category. We'll just maybe change the text on the H1. We can just remove the H4 tag. I think that makes sense. Right, so that title looks better. Anything else we'd change? Either visually or function-wise. Okay, that's a good point, Fatima. So right now I can submit the field that way. So category ID is required already automatically, but I can also do this. So Microsoft has a really neat way of doing this. Instead of adding the validation into our form, we could actually add the validation into our category model. And this way we can put the validation rules in here, and any form that uses the category model will automatically follow those rules. So first thing we need to do is we need to make the name required. So we can do this above the name property in square brackets. We can add the word required. Now, I'm getting an error right now. That's okay. If I put my mouse over it and click on the little code hint, it says in order to use this required attribute, you need to add the reference to the system component model.data annotations library. So there is this required feature, but it's in a library that we haven't included in the project yet. So if I just double click that suggestion, it adds line 3. My red line goes away and the word required turns blue. So I'm going to save that change. So we could add line 3 manually, but much easier to just let Visual Studio write that code for us. just come back here, try it out. So now when I click create, it says name is required. As soon as I type something in here, the jQuery hides the error message because it checks, it validates these rules on key press events. We could also customize the error message. Maybe we don't want it to say the name field is required. So if we want our own error message, we can say error message equals so we could put in our own validation errors if we want to. So let's shrink this a bit more. So now if I click create, it shows our custom error instead. So our category ID, it's already validated as numeric. It's validated that it's required, but it's not validated against negative numbers. So what rule, we want to add a rule for category ID. What rule should we add around the category ID values? That would make sense. We know it's required. We know it has to be a number. But this is probably not ideal. Yeah, I agree, Tushar. So we can use, yeah, greater than 0. So let's add a validation rule here. And we've got a range function we can use where we'll set the minimum as 1 and let's say the maximum as whatever. So if we add this range here, now it'll tell me, nope, the field has to be between 1 and 999. As soon as I get to 1, the error will go away. I want to make one other little design change here. Name is good. What about this here? How should we improve this label? Yeah, let's put in a space, right? So it just takes the property names directly from our model, but we can give our property name an alias. So anywhere it's printed or displayed in the site, we can display it using some friendlier name. So we'll set display name equals, and then in quotes, category ID. So this is going to add a space automatically to our label. Not only on this form, but on any other forms that use the category as the model class. That reloads, and now we get a space here. So the scaffolding, the code generation to build our pages and our forms, they work, but they're not 100% complete. We usually have to make these kinds of little adjustments to them, right? We change some of the HTML to fix the heading. We've given an alias to the label, and then we've had to add some validation rules so that we can get the inputs we want. So our scaffolding probably does 90% of the work, and we have to do that other 10% to kind of clean them up and finish them. But this is still far superior to creating forms from scratch, where we have to write all the code ourselves. That is exactly right, Jordan. We want to work smart rather than harder. Let's work smarter. Okay, are there any questions so far about the form that we've built or the customizations that we've made to it, either in our view or in our model? I'm going to push my changes up to GitHub. So I'll go to Git Changes, Lesson 3, Part 1. And I will commit and push. So all the code we've just done is on GitHub now. We're going to take a little break here. We will resume at 12. Kathleen, if I've got a couple minutes, although I will need to get out of my chair soon, if you want to share your screen, I can take a quick look at the issue that you're having. Okay, and we will come back at 12. Oops.